Jim turned. If Daniel were that nice little kid at the post, yes, here came the same boy, his head like the spot of sunshine in the dreary tangle of trees and mud and wagons. "'Bout time," Johnny grunted. He got up again and started around the wagon, no longer able to hide his painful limping. "We'll have a fire going soon at any rate, but I'd better move them oxen first." Jim made a sudden decision. "No," he said. "You better get off of them feet. That's what you better do. I'm going to fix the fire, and the oxen got plenty of grass right where they're at." "That's right," Sally said slowly. "I moved them a few minutes before you come, but how'd you know it?" Jim thought of that hoof print, plain as day and twice as obvious, and wondered how anybody could help knowing it. But he said only, "Stay off them feet, Johnny," and strode past the wagon and into the trees to tether his animals for the night and unload the mule. It was clear to him that there would be no happy homecoming yet awhile. Jonathan and Sally had each other. He meant little to them except a means of getting their land. All right, he thought, giving bad medicine an unnecessarily rough push. Want him or not, they needed him. They needed him to claim that land. They needed him to help them through the gorge, and they needed him to get them in shape before they could start. They didn't even know how much they needed him. But he was going to show them. When he came back, carrying his possibles and clutching Moki firmly by the scruff of the neck, he found Daniel there. "That's the one!" cried the boy. "That's the dog I was telling you." The rest trailed away as he gazed up at Jim. You really are brother?" he inquired softly. "Yep. Nothing to dread here. That was plain at once." Jim dumped his pack. Now for a start on all that had to be done. Better settle Moki first. "Come over here," he told Daniel. "You can pet the dog now." Daniel and Moki took to each other as readily as Daniel and Jim had. Sally's turn came next, and though she eyed the big beast with suspicion, she showed no sign of flinching. Jonathan had taken Jim's advice and was sitting beside her on a flat stone near the wagon, his feet stretched out gingerly in front of him, his hands busy slicing a length of rope. "You notice I ain't arguing with you about who'll build the fire," he remarked with a grin. "I feel like I got stumps instead of feet. Sally'll have the grub ready by the time you get it going. Daniel, let's have that wood." The boy ran to get the wood where he had dumped. Jim followed to the fallen log where the old ashes were, conscious of Sally murmuring something to Jonathan as he moved away. They began to talk in low tones, too indistinctly for him to hear. The boy staggered back with the wood. Jim tossed half of it aside and began arranging a few sticks like the spokes of a wheel. "Say, is that the way you build a fire?" asked the boy in surprise, squatting down nearby. "Johnny always piles on a whole lot so it'll burn up bright." "White man's fire," grunted Jim. "So big you can't get near it to warm yourself." He moved a little distance away and came back with a handful of dry brush grass, which he twisted into a little nest. The boy watching every move and chattering eagerly. "We had real big fires at night on the trail, and guards to watch for Injuns. Johnny was a guard lots of times, and I protected Sis. That was after Mama went away. Johnny took care of both of us and the oxen and the wagon and everything, all the way from the Sweetwater. He can play a banjo, too." "Johnny's quite a guy, isn't he?" Jim murmured. "Yeah, I'll say. Hey, where'd you get them scars on your forehead?" "Grizzly slapped me." "Cracky! What'd you do?" "Killed him." Jim had filled the nest with bits of punk from his pouch, and now he was striking sparks into it with flint and steel. When it began to smolder, he waved it in the air until it burst into flame, and then thrust it into the pile of twigs underneath the logs. "Johnny killed a wolf once," Daniel said thoughtfully. He peered again at the scars. "They ain't new, are they? Look all healed up." Jim answered absently, his mind half on the low-toned conversation behind him, half on the wood, which was too wet to catch well. "No, they ain't new. I was just a young'un when that happened. About your age, a little older." There, it was burning all right now. He started to rise and caught sight of Daniel's face. "What's up?" he inquired, startled. "You fought a grizzly?" cried the boy. "When you was just my age?" An unfamiliar warmth flowed through Jim. He grinned and shrugged. "Well, it was him or me." A notion struck him suddenly. "Let me see your shoe. The left un." Daniel looked at him in surprise and then obeyed. There was a deep, wiggly scratch across the bottom of the worn leather heel, the same as had showed on those footprints behind the wagon. Jim squatted down again, smiling. What'd you find under that big rock this afternoon? Grub worms? Daniel's eyes widened to twice their size. Beetles, he answered mechanically. Say, what was that knife game you was playing? Mumbly Peg, gulped Daniel. He fished a clasp knife out of his pocket. You take a hold of the blade, see, and he demonstrated, producing a series of slits identical with the ones Jim had noticed earlier. Want to learn a new trick or two? Jim asked him. Sure. Look, hold it this way. See that bug crawling up the tree yonder? Yeah, I see him. He's cracky. Daniel stood frozen. The small black bug was sliced exactly in half by a quivering blade. Slowly he turned back to Jim. Could I do that? I'll teach you. As soon as you didn't, cut in Sally's emphatic voice. She was standing beside Jonathan. Both of them were staring from Jim to the knife. He rose, his face settling into its impassive mask. Fire's ready for cooking, he remarked. Sally came forward, carrying a skillet full of white, knobby objects that must be supper. What's that? He demanded. Spuds. It's all we got. Spuds are potatoes. He smiled at her defiant face. Throw them things away, he said. I got meat, plenty of it. Potatoes, he thought as he moved toward his pack. That's what he had smelled cooking all around the encampment. He dug a bulky, hide-wrapped bundle out of his belongings and came back to the fire. Jonathan walked over and faced him. Now listen, Jim, we ain't going to take your grub. Not take it? Want me to set and eat it by myself? If you want. We got the spuds and they'll do us. We don't need, you need plenty from where I sit, Jim said. All right, maybe we do, but we ain't aiming to live off you. That ain't why I wrote the letter. I don't care why you wrote the letter. You gotta eat, by thunder. Exasperation flared up in Jim as he saw the stubborn pride only deepen in both their faces. You ain't got no more idea than a beaver kitten what you're up again, he roared. How fur do you think you get on a raft to build and the gorge to run and half froze for grub and plumb crippled? Start shooting that river yonder on empty belly and you're a gone beaver afore you hit the first rapids. Long as I got meat, we all got meat. We all eat it. Understand? I'm taking over around here till you get in shape. Now set down. Turned his back on them, and his usual quiet, husky tones said to Daniel, Fetch me 2 sticks, forked ones, high as my knee. The sudden burst of temper had been as unexpected to him as to them, but at least it had the desired effect. Jonathan and Sally dropped down on the fireside log in strained silence, and after hastily obeying Jim's order, Daniel joined them. Jim stooped, unrolled the bundle, and set to work. The knife slipped in and out of the slab of meat with swift precision. He rigged a spit across Daniel's 2 forked sticks, and in a matter of moments a haunch was sizzling there. The ribs he slanted over the flames, and a sharp stick thrust at an angle into the ground. When the heady aroma of roasting meat began to blend with the smoke, he turned and looked at these strangers who were his family. Sally sat close by Jonathan on the log, her arm linked tight through his, the set of her chin stubbornly at variance with the tender curve of her throat. They looked alike, those two, in spite of their delicacy and giant's gaunt straight. Though Jim could not tell just why, perhaps it was the angle of jaw and brow, perhaps identical expressions of forced carelessness. Only Daniel, huddled on the other side of the fire, his eyes glazed with hunger, gave any sign of noticing the aroma that floated upward from the haunch. Jim knew the others must be turning faint inside from the smell of it. Still fighting inside against what he was doing. He turned away, shaking his head. He moved back and forth from his pack, bringing the grisly robe to throw around the shivering Daniel, producing strips of blanket and a curiously shaped root, which he pulverized by pounding it between 2 stones. He found a bucket of water beside a wheel of the wagon and filled his gourd, and then went back and splashed water into his mortar stone. Mixing it with the powder already there, he stood up and turned to Jonathan. Take off them boots, he ordered. What? Jonathan stared up at him. He looked half drunk with the smell of meat. Them boots, get 'em off. Jonathan obeyed mechanically. Next instant, Jim had flung them into the fire. "Wait!" shrieked Sally, and Jonathan exploded into profanity. "Never mind them things," Jim told him calmly. "Nothing but a nuisance in this country. Any papoose knows that much. Stick out a foot." Capturing one of Jonathan's swollen and lacerated feet, he peeled off the scrap of sock and began smearing on the thick paste he had concocted. "What's that?" gasped Jonathan. Jim smiled a little. He knew the marvelous numbness that was creeping through the abused flesh. "Ox pea puka, sticky root. Hold still." Jonathan held still. Tears of relief sprang into his eyes, and his thick lashes dropped down hastily to cover them. Jim softened in spite of himself. After all, they were bone-tired and hungry and half-sick with worry, and they didn't trust him. Yet. Why should they? 9 years and 2,000 miles couldn't be wiped out in an hour. As he secured the last strip of blanket bandage comfortably around Jonathan's ankle, the black eyes opened to meet his own. For a moment their minds met, a wordless truce. Then Johnny grinned slowly and tried out in a ragged voice, "Much obliged. I think I'll get there now." Jim nodded. Then he straightened swiftly and, moving to the fire, began to hack off chunks of meat and pile them on bark slabs. "Let's eat," he said. That's the end of chapter 5. Chapter 6. It was Jim who roused first in the chilly, drizzling daybreak 2 mornings later. He came instantly wide awake all over, as he always did, and from long habit glanced first at his rifle and then at his horse. Both were safe. Then he looked toward the river. Today they would start through the gorge. He got up and walked to the end of the wagon, stroking Buckskin's beautiful arched neck and gazing thoughtfully into the gorge. He'd traversed it once last summer, in a good canoe. It was bad enough even then. 50 miles of the roughest, most treacherous river he'd ever laid eyes on, full of rapids and tearing currents, winding, bending, boiling, crammed with stubborn obstacles, any one of which could rip your craft and you wide open. But the walls of the mountains that had crowded the mighty Columbia into this narrow space rose sheer and black from the water's depths, and for wagons there was no other possible entry into the valley between here and California. His eyes moved from the river to the heights above, toward which he and Daniel would soon be sharing with the animals. That would be a new trail to him. He and Tom had crossed south of Mount Hood, and if this was anything like that, 2 nights ago Rutledge and his son Ned had appeared after supper, and the 6 of them had made what plans they could for a journey that was at best a wild gamble. They would build the raft large enough for both families. But what about the animals? Hire these Injuns around here to drive them over the mountain, and you could turn up missing a few head, say about half. But you couldn't take critters on a raft. "I'll take 'em over," Jim had spoken up. They'd all looked at him with a mixture of hope and doubt. "That trail," Rutledge said, "I've heard it ain't worth the name. It's winter up yonder, boy. I reckon I can get 'em through. I'll take Dan'l help out. That'll leave you and Johnny and Ned to pull the raft." It was the only way out, and they had decided on it. The raft was built and ready now. They'd worked all day yesterday, cutting small trees and lashing them together. The remaining problem was food. Jim turned away from the river and moved silently to his pack. The prime pelt he had captured and rough dressed last week on Powder River had sunned on its willow hoop all the way to the Dalles, and now lay folded with the others among his possibles. Shielding it with his body from the light rain, he shook it out and examined it carefully for signs of dampness, almost surprised that it looked so fresh. It seemed years since that morning he had said goodbye to Tom. He wrapped it in a piece of old buffalo robe and tucked it under his arm. It galled him to spend good beaver just for food, but his meat was gone now, and there was no time to hunt. Winter was already breathing down their necks.